I've always emphasized how important it is for us to be able to have a significant level of control over our emotions and impulses, as its unhinged nature could leave us vulnerable to making poor decisions and eventually drown us in the wallows of regret. However, looking back at it, I've realized that what I've told and explained to you gentlemen are merely simple tools on how to manage it or neutralize it, which is fine on their own, but they won't necessarily allow you to have a sense of confident authority over your emotions and impulses. In this video though, I'm going to explain pretty much the only weapon potent enough for you to eventually achieve that sense of authority and control, which is cultivating your ability for rationality. Now in a hindsight, you might think, well, we're already capable of rationality, mate. Isn't that what makes our brain different from that of animals? And the answer is yes, we do. However, our brains do still possess the old, primarily impulsive reptilian and mammalian attributes to sense, feel, and process emotions, even before the evolution of the neocortex that allows us to perform cognitive functions. Emotions will always be the innate priority for our brains to process. That is why most of us often unconsciously make decisions and judgments based solely on how we personally feel about the circumstance. Our ability to rationalize things will need to be trained and practiced over time if we do want to eventually develop that mental capability to interfere and restrain our emotions. To develop our rationality, the first thing we need to do is to become fully and acceptably aware of our own impulsive and emotional nature. Emotions originates as chemical reactions and sensations that is biologically designed to capture our attention and take sharp notice of our environments, onto which we are intrigued enough to want to understand where they come from and interpret them into language. However, because they are processed in different parts of the brain from our cognitive functions, most of us don't get to know where they come from or the reason why we react as such to them, making our interpretation of our own emotions oftentimes inaccurate and vivid. That is why oftentimes we do not know the exact reason why we feel angry, sad, or depressed. Now, I got a lot of bashes from people who think that controlling our emotions means that we should completely shut down our reception to our own emotions like a robot. No. Absolutely not. You cannot completely separate yourself from your emotions. It is utterly impossible. You cannot fully separate your feelings from being involved in making decisions. Even the most rational people of them all is unable to do so. However, what makes rational people different from most of us and more effective and successful in decision making than us is that they have a deep sense of introspection to deduct emotions substantially from their thinking and counteract their effect. Their sense of awareness is what makes them able to vigilantly control their impulses. Irrational people, on the other hand, have no such awareness. They always rush into conclusions and make decisions based on whatever accommodates the needs of their emotional biasness that also soothe their egos. You can actually distinguish someone who is rational or irrational, or at the very least, notice which one they're more inclined to or dominant by, simply through the nature of their decision making. Rational people do what needs to be done. Irrational people do what they feel like doing, which today often comes in the form of defensive excuses to avoid responsibilities. The existing nature of our impulsive irrationality is below our own level of consciousness. That is why it is difficult for us to become innately aware of them operating. However, although we may not be conscious of its nature, we can be conscious of its activity scratching the surface through our physical responses and reactions. This is how you develop that awareness. Pay attention. I've talked about emotional trigger points before, but never in a way that is descriptive enough to help you become more mindful of their existence. Try to catch yourself off guard by noticing behavior from yourself that is suddenly off character and moments where you can feel a sense of emotional pressure, brittleness, and leakage. Usually, it is in the physical sensation of a sudden buildup of tears, a difficulty to swallow, a heavy feeling on your chest, a sudden hesitancy to speak or muttering up words, and your immediate mental withdrawal from a situation, i.e. you inadvertently went into a brief and sudden self-reflection mode, and/or you shift your focus away from the circumstance by slightly looking down or beside you. Essentially, circumstances that trigger a subtle accumulating sense of sensitivity, vulnerability, anxiety, agitation, irritation, and stress that momentarily disconnects you from your senses. You also tend to freeze, shudder, stop whatever it is that you are doing, or even got sloppy, careless, and unaware of what you are doing during these moments. These low-grade emotions will slowly compel you to react, and if further provoked or remain unchecked, can turn into high-grade emotions where you will completely enter into tunnel vision and culminate into unsupervised rash actions. Like when we experience strings of losses or defeats, we often start to feel that we are somehow eternally cursed for misfortunes. This can get us to become extremely fearful, hesitant, and nervous, and become more prone to making even more mistakes and experience more failures. When you finally become aware and conscious of your trigger points that create all those subtle tendencies, this is where you must bring yourself to withdraw physically and completely from the situation. Especially in the beginning, or if you are a beginner, find yourself a place where you can be alone, like the bathroom or your own room, and focus on trying to dig deep into those trigger points to see where they originate from. It is much better to display some situational awkwardness through physical withdrawal, especially when there are people around you, than to utterly embarrass yourself through a sudden outburst of emotions. This is something you need to constantly practice, as the more you are able to imminently step back and assess yourself, the easier it will be to eventually tame your emotions without having to physically remove yourself. Now, this is where the challenge can be quite substantial for most of us, especially if you've never done a deep, raw, and brutal introspection into the roots of your own weaknesses. Our rationality is able to innately recognize and acknowledge our discrepancies, but our ego and irrationality prevents it from ever being brought into full consciousness. Again, pain versus pleasure. The reason why you experience all those understated sensations is because you have a vivid notification of your own weaknesses, but your ego decides against them ever being taken out of their shelves, thus creating the mental friction within your mind, resulting in your failure to effectively interpret those weaknesses and master your response towards them being provoked. Your biggest enemy and challenge here is bringing your ego to come to terms with the reality of your circumstances instead of allowing it to maintain favorable and soothing illusions about yourself. Your weaknesses, the root of your major high-end emotions, especially in today's age, they all originate from a collection of underlying, unresolved insecurities. Provocations of our insecurities gets us to go into a protective or defensive state, as they are innately perceived as existential threats to our need for self-esteem, either from the social and/or our own perception of ourselves. Acknowledging and accepting your deep-rooted insecurities and being able to dissect and pinpoint their origins will be the key to you eventually recognizing with clarity their components and pattern to the surface objectively and achieve the state of rationality. Being able to fully know and understand something give us the sense of control and confidence that we so desperately need towards the chaos and unpredictability of our circumstances. And a high degree of our rationality allow us to achieve that state. We all have our own insecurities. That is what makes us human. No matter how godly or untouchable someone appears to be, they have their weaknesses. They are just way more viscerally aware and understanding of them, to the point where they have become proficiently capable to stop it surfacing for other people to notice and take advantage of. Rationality and irrationality, reason and emotion, they are like riders and horses. The horse is our emotional side, with the power, the energy, and the passion. The rider is our rational side, with the restraint, the control, and the direction. Without the rider, the horse is wild, aimless, and destructive. Without the horse, the rider is lifeless, inactive, and stagnant. When they work together, they can become extremely productive and capable of amazing feats. Effective and objective rationality is an ability developed through constant practice and maturity. They do not come naturally. Assess every circumstance with your rationality first and foremost in order to come to an objective conclusion and/or decision. Once you know what to do with the situation with utmost clarity and confidence, your perspective and attitude towards that situation simultaneously changes. And yes, so does your emotional reaction or response. Your initial whiff of negative emotions will transform into a wave of positive emotions filled with enthusiasm, as you now have a clear direction of where to go. And also, as your ego has come to terms or see eye to eye with the reality of your circumstances. This is exactly how you effectively tame, transform, and utilize emotions to your advantage as useful momentum. Emotions provide the components to develop effective reasoning. Reasoning provides the means to utilize productive emotions. Thank you for watching.